Okay.
Um, just looking back, can you trace your initial attraction to folk music to any specific moment in your youth?
Yes, absolutely. It was to a concert I went to when I was in high school in New York City, um, and it was a Pete Seeger concert
Ah,
in Brooklyn, which was foreign territory for me because I lived in the Bronx. If you know the difference, it's like Australia and New York. They're like a world apart, but they're in the same city, so it's not quite that bad. But I was going to a high school in Manhattan called the High School of Music and Art, which was a special school that you had to apply to get into, and naturally it pulled together kids that were interested in the arts, and so they told me about this Pete Seeger concert, and a bunch of us went to Brooklyn to this show, and that pretty much changed my life. Um, I don't remember whether I was already playing the guitar or not at that point, but it definitely changed my whole point of view about what music is or could be, just because it was not just what you heard on the radio, the pop music of the day, but it was music that could be done by one guy standing on a stage and everybody's singing along with him and singing songs that had some kind of social significance. So all that kind of just turned my head around. And I was about 16, I guess, at the time.
wow. I believe you studied guitar yourself with the great Brownie McGee. Is that right?
Yeah, that was a few years later. Probably about 4 years later, I was going to college by that time in New York City, and I discovered that Brownie lived in the city and that he was in the phone book. So I called him up, and he said, "Come on over." So and that started me on several years of on and off, not every week or anything, but a few years of on and off lessons with him, and actually ended up going on a few gigs with him and with Sonny Terry, and traveling not extensively, but a few times we went out of town together, and culminated in the early '70s with us co-writing an instructional book called The Guitar Styles of Brownie McGee, which sadly it's out of print now, but it, I'm sure it's still available somewhere.
So what kind of teacher was Brownie? Was he very effective on you?
He was very effective. He was a guy who, of course, he wasn't a trained teacher, but so basically, what I would do is bring my guitar over to his house, and we would sit and play together. And he would show me licks, and we'd play songs together, and he would crit- criticize what I was doing, or show me ways to improve from his point of view what was a little more authentic or what was more rhythmic. He really got my right hand thumb going in a particularly strong way, and taught me a bunch of songs that I didn't know. And it was that kind of thing. It was very informal, but we would just go and play together, and then he would just kind of pass on information to me as he thought it was appropriate.
Talk about your time with the New World Singers. How did that group all come together?
Well, they were already a group. I had met Gil Turner, who was the kind of de facto leader of the group. I met him in the Village in New York, and it was a trio with a young woman at the time named Dolores Dixon and Bob Cohen, who was the other guy in the group, and Gil. And I think I met them at this club called Gertie's Folk City, this famous folk club in New York. And at one point, he said, "Would you like to join the group and make it a quartet?" So that was it was very exciting to me. They were very involved in songs of the civil rights movement and kind of peace movement, and Gil was a big fan of Pete Seeger's. In fact, he pretty much took his persona very much from Pete. So we were doing similar things to maybe the Weavers or groups like that at the time. Eventually, Dolores Dixon left, and we became a trio of three guys, and that lasted a couple of years. And then I left, but we made one album for Atlantic Records. And actually, strangely enough, just yesterday, I was at a recording session for a DVD that I'm making with someone and for Homespun, and the sound guy who was doing the audio for this looked on eBay and found a copy of our New World Singers LP for sale for $75. So
Wow.
you know, so it's somebody still remembers it.
Yeah. I read on your website that yours was the first recording of Blowing in the Wind. What do you remember of your first reaction to hearing that song when you first heard it?
Oh well, it just knocked all of us out. I remember I was in the basement of Gertie's Folk City where we were playing with Gil and Bob and Dolores, and Bob had just written it not very long before and had taught it to Gil Turner, and Gil came down to Gertie's Folk City. I can't remember at this point whether Bob was there or not, but I remember he had it in a piece of paper that was torn out from a spiral notebook, and he said, "You got to listen to this song," and Gil sang it to me, and we all just sort of said, we never heard a song like that before. So we immediately learned it and started playing it publicly. Probably that same night, I think we started playing it together. And then a few, I don't know how long after that, we went into the recording studio to make this record called Broadsides, which was actually my first time ever in a professional recording studio. And I found myself in a small room with Pete Seeger and Phil Oakes and Bob Dylan and our group and the Freedom Singers from Albany, Georgia, and some other, Peter Lafarge, who was an American Indian folk singer, songwriter. And we did Blowing in the Wind, and it hadn't been released on a record before that. And actually on the New World Singers album, on our Atlantic album, was the first recording of Don't Think Twice Is All Right also.
Wow.
And it's of historic importance to me, but wasn't of any commercial importance to us. We didn't sell enough. Peter, Paul, and Mary seemed to have cornered the market in the commercial side of things. So, but it was, looking back, it was pretty fun to do those things because we knew how important Bob was and was going to be.
Yeah, your association with Bob Dylan goes back a long way. Do you recall your first meeting with him?
I don't remember the actual first meeting. I know it goes back to about 1962. And he used to come down when the New World Singers played at Gertie's Folk City. He used to come down and come for the late show, which usually started around 12:30, 1 in the morning. We would do 3 sets a night, or sometimes 4 sets a night, and of course there would be another act on as well. And Bob would often come down and just kind of do a few songs for the 6 or 7 remaining half-drunk patrons that were left sitting in the dark there. So I knew Bob then, and I certainly had known him by the time we went into the studio in early '63 to do the Blowing in the Wind, because he was in the studio with us. So I did, I certainly knew him then, but I don't remember the actual first time ever meeting with him.
Sure. I saw a blog on your website where you wrote about recording with Bob again in the early 70s, and
yeah,
even though he'd been a friend and neighbour of yours for many years, you still felt generally excited about the prospect of recording with him. I guess it's safe to say that the music fan within you never goes away, that you can still be in awe of someone that you've known on a friendship level for so long.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's never gone away. I mean, Bob is a singular genius of our day, in my opinion, and I think I never took my friendship with him for granted, and always, was probably the first one out to buy the next record he put out. I
Yeah.
mean, I've been a big fan of his for a long time, and so yeah, when I went back in the studio with him in '71, we had been good friends around that during that period of time, but it didn't for a minute escape me that it was a momentous thing just to be asked to do that. Just him and me in the studio, so that was a kind of a special time too.
Yeah. Another concept, another project you were involved with, the Woodstock Mountains Review. Can you tell us how that came to be and how it felt to be a part of a concept like that?
Yeah, that was originally instigated before it was called the Woodstock Mountains Review. It was instigated by my brother Artie, who, as you probably know, passed away 4 years ago.
Yeah.
He had this idea. I think he had met Ken Irwin, who was the one of the three owners and instigators of Rounder Records. And Rounder was just getting started. I think we were in the first 20 records that they ever put out, and we made this. We just had this idea that we would get together with the people who were living in Woodstock at the time, who were friends of ours, that we would play together with at parties, and go into a studio and just have a party and play music. So that album turned out to be called Mud Acres, Music Among Friends. And it was pretty, reasonably successful, not a huge seller, not enough for anybody to make any money off of, but it got a lot of notoriety at the time, and people still talk to me about it. So that was basically our friends. It was Maria Muldaur, John Herold, Jim Rooney, Bill Keith, Artie, myself, and a few other people who were happened to be available at the time. So about 5 years after that came out, we thought it was time to do it with some of the same people, but also a new cast of characters as well, because some people had moved on, left Woodstock. Maria Muldaur had already had this huge hit called Midnight at the Oasis, and she was living in California. So we just decided it would be fun to do something else, and so we brought in a new bunch of friends and some of the old ones as well. And it turned out to be a big project, and that was called Woodstock Mountains. And out of that, we formed a kind of a movable feast of a touring group where people would come and go, but we had the same core group for the most part. And that lasted maybe 10 years on, but very much on and off. But we went to Europe together. Some of us went to Japan together, and played a few tours around the East Coast. I don't think we ever went further than the East Coast in the United States. And just had a great time. I mean, it was just a wonderful group of musicians, and we made 3 more albums together under the kind of Woodstock Mountains umbrella, with, as I said, different people coming and going, and all people that were either on the Woodstock scene during those years or were frequent visitors here. Some of them only came, very momentarily, like Bernie Ledden, who was in the Eagles, one of the original Eagles. He just happened to be coming through and joined us for one of the records. So, but John Sebastian, Paul Butterfield, Eric Anderson, Rory Block, people like that. Pat Alger, who's a fantastic singer and songwriter. Roly Sally, a bass player. Larry Campbell, who's now pretty much a superstar as a sideman and also a great lead artist. He played with Bob Dylan for 8 years, and then played with Lee Von Helm for the last 8 years or so of his life. So it was a great group, and we still remain close friends. But it's not often that we get together, and of course some of them aren't here anymore. So
yeah, a real sense of community though in that project. Do you think that's something that's lacking from the music scene today?
We still have that sense of community here in this little town. Woodstock, it's a very small place, but it's got an inordinate number of really talented people. And we still do at least 3 or 4 times a year, different groups of people get together for different causes. Usually it's for a benefit of some kind. Um, but I think that sense, at least around here, which is what I know best, still does exist. The last year, just around a little over a year ago, we had a series of horrendous floods in this area from something called Hurricane Irene, and there were several big concerts that we did with local artists and raised quite a lot of money for flood victims. And I do an annual concert, which is just coming up in December, or always around just before Christmas, called the Solstice Concert. And it's also, John Sebastian, Larry Campbell, Larry's wife Teresa, Amy Helm, Levon's daughter, and several other people get together for a concert that's always sold out. It's always got a great feeling, and it's a benefit for a local arts organization here. So, there is still that sense of community. It may not be as vibrant as it was, but also the very for me the very optimistic thing is that there's a lot of young people coming into this area in their 20s and 30s now. I'm the old dinosaur now, but there's a lot of young people coming in who are picking up the mantle and coming out with some great music, including the children of some of like Amy Helm, who's the daughter of Levon, and I don't know if you know Jay Unger and Molly Mason. Their daughters, Ruthie Unger and her husband Mike Miranda, make fabulous music, and my next door neighbors. A young guy named Carl or A.C. Newman, who was the lead singer and songwriter for the New Pornographers, and he joins us for some things. It's just it's still a vital area here. So, and I'm sure other parts of the country and other parts of the world have the same thing going on. It's just not the big commercial success. It never was a big commercial success for music. So, I just have to be thankful that the music continues on whatever level it does.
Now, working alongside your brother Artie for all those years must have been something you treasure dearly. There's always something really special about the sound of siblings making music together. Do you think, had Artie not been your brother, he would have been the type of guy you would have sought out to work with?
Well, he might have been. I don't know that it would have been something that lasted for 40 years or whatever it was. Just having grown up in the same house and we were actually quite different as people. Our personalities were different, but we never lost the bond and the closeness. And musically, in some ways, he was much more advanced than I was musically. He got into more of the jazz and kind of more adventurous kind of songwriting. He was a real seeker of new sounds and had a lot, and I was sort of always the more folky of the two of us. But when we got together and played, it was always just like falling off a log. Even if we had never played a song before, it seemed to just be so easy to do. So, I really do miss that part of it. Just the ease and comfort of playing with somebody for that long, and we were never terribly competitive with each other about it. We just enjoyed it. So that lasted up until very close to the time he passed.
Now, your association with the tuition of music is well known through Homespun, but as far back as the mid-'60s, you were writing instructional books. Was there a lack of such resources back at that time for aspiring musicians?
Well, there was. The first book I wrote for Oak Publications back in, I think it was 1965, was called Fingerpicking Styles for Guitar, which is still in print to this day, which is amazing to me. And my idea was to transcribe for learning guitarists the fingerpicking solos of or styles of some of the great traditional players like Mississippi John Hurt or Merle Travis or Elizabeth Cotton, people like that. And nobody, I didn't even realize this when I did it, but nobody ever came up with that idea before to actually take those solos off of records, which I did. I just sat down endlessly with records, slowed them down, and figured out the notes that they were playing as accurately as I possibly could. So I guess that was lacking because at that time nobody had ever done that before. There's probably a lot of that out there now, but it kind of was a revelation to a lot of people, and I still hear from so many people, either people who were not professional musicians or even well-known players, who say, "Oh yeah, I remember that book. That was my first guitar book, or that was the first book I ever learned fingerpicking from." So it's been a huge thing. I mean, I don't know how many copies it sold in the last how many years that is, since 1965. It takes higher math to figure that out, but probably sold a lot of books over the years and around the world. I mean, I know it's sold in Australia and lots of other places.
So when you first set up Homespun, did you envisage it to be something that had the potential to grow into what it became?
No, not at the beginning. I was just doing it kind of as a service for my students who I was kind of leaving behind when I was starting to go on tour with Artie, and I had always been a guitar teacher, even since I was in college. I was going to summer camps and making my extra pocket money by teaching lessons. So I was always interested in teaching guitar. So I had students. I already had a couple of kids at that point, but started going on the road, and I just decided should make some taped lessons for them so they had something to work on while I was gone. And at the same time, there were people who had my book, the fingerpicking book, and they were writing me letters and saying, "Well, I can't find the records that these were taken from, and I can see the tablature that you wrote or the music that you wrote, but I really don't know how it's supposed to sound." So I started thinking, well, maybe I should make tapes of how I think it should sound. I couldn't legally make tapes of the records. That wouldn't have been right. So I just started making tapes, and then I started putting a few ads around in the local music magazines, and lo and behold, people started responding. So it just kind of built from there. And then both Jane, my wife, and I realized that maybe we could expand it and bring in other artists. And we started bringing in friends who were in the neighborhood. And then we started going further afield and finding people whose music we liked from other areas of the country. And before we knew it, we had a catalog.
And is it true that back in the early days you were running copies from tape machines set up all along your dining room table?
Totally. It was of course reel-to-reel tapes, which people don't even know what it was, and the tapes would have, of course, two sides, so you'd have to turn the tape over to hear the second side because the tapes ran, in both directions.
Yeah.
So our master would be set up on one tape recorder, and then we get a couple of other tape recorders with the slave, what they call the slaves, the copies being made, and we'd run it through one side, and then we'd have to turn the master over, turn each of the slaves over, and run it through on the other side. So the first two years maybe or so, we did it that way, and then cassettes came in. So people don't even realize that cassettes were fairly late. Only, I think, the late 60s they started to get to be popular. So then we started attaching cassette machines to the masters, as well as, so we'd be running reel-to-reel and cassettes. And then it took us about 10 years before we actually phased out the reel-to-reel tapes and went only cassettes.
And I guess turning to video would have been a major advancement in terms of your presentation.
Oh yeah, that was a huge change. And that was about 1982 or 83 maybe, when video cassette machines started to appear on the marketplace. And so I immediately knew what the potential for that would be in terms of instruction. It really didn't take me 5 minutes to make that connection and say, hey, this is so much better to be able to see what the guy's doing. So we set up a camera in my living room. We got a local guy who had just moved to Woodstock, and he's still making the majority of our videos. He had a camera, and we started. I told him come over to my living room, and of course I was the first subject, so I sat in front of my fireplace and made a one camera lesson. And then we started little by little figuring out how to make two cameras, then three cameras, how to mix them together, how to edit them. It was all trial and error and very sort of catch as catch can at that point. But, the advances kept coming. At first, we started live switching the three cameras, so we were pretty much stuck with whatever went on tape, but then eventually we figured out how to make three separate tapes and mix them together so we could make it look more professional. And now, of course, it's all digital and people barely remember what a DVD is.
I'm guessing that there is some kind of prestige now for an artist to be invited to do a session for Homespun. Do you have musicians actually approaching you now to be involved?
Oh, we've always had musicians, lots of them, yes. And unfortunately, I can't do them all. It's just we're limited by how many we can do in a given year. So I try to choose according to the people that, first of all, if I admire them and feel that they have something to offer that's different from what we already have. And we have, I don't know, probably around 400 titles in our catalog. So I don't want to repeat ourselves too much. So if if I find people who I know are good communicators and also have a unique style, then I try my best to put something out with them. Or if it's somebody that I've long admired and feel like it's important for posterity to have that aspect of their playing documented. So, for example, we recently did a DVD with Peggy Seeger, Pete's younger sister. Well, she's younger sister, but she's in her mid-70s now. And I've just loved her music ever since I first started playing, and I just felt it was really important to have a lesson with her so we could see what her ideas about the guitar have been over the years. And, I'm delighted that we were able to do that.
Yeah, I guess the true value of these recordings won't be realised to many years down the track when these people are no longer with us. We've got this fantastic recorded document of them explaining their craft.
Maybe people are not with us anymore, and I'm very glad we've got them documented, like Bill Monroe or Doc Watson, people who are really important American artists, as well as, there are several people who were on Homespun that sadly are no longer with us, but their music lives on in that way as well as the other ways that they've recorded their stuff.
Is there anyone in particular that hasn't committed themselves to a Homespun session that you'd really like to get?
I have a wish list, and for one reason or another, some of them have not been willing to do it. I don't want to say who they are at this point, but there's definitely people who are high on my want to have on Homespun list. But I feel so blessed by some of the people that have said yes and that we have gotten. I mean, what a thing to have Pete Seeger, my original inspiration for starting to play this kind of music, to have done a DVD for us. And also, talking about Pete Seeger, who's still now has become a friend and somebody who I still admire enormously. About 10 years ago, he came to us and said his contract was up for the banjo book that he wrote in the mid-1950s, and he turned over the publishing of that book to us. So that's the book I learned how to play the banjo on when I was a teenager. So, I mean, nothing could be better than that for me.
Yeah. With your involvement with Homespun currently, how much time is left for you to pursue your own music, either on the road or recording?
I'm not going on the road very much these days, and I guess I'm. It's not so much because of Homespun, but for various reasons, I'm not feeling the hunger to go out and go on tour. On the other hand, I love to play out, and if people ask me, I usually say yes. It's one of those things where if they come to me and say, "I'd love you to play at our venue or wherever it is," and I'm usually hard pressed to say no unless it's a place that's really hard to get to or it just doesn't make sense. But I just love to play, and I'm still hoping to get overseas again, as I used to play in Europe or Japan or even Australia. Would be lovely to come back to. I only was there once for about 6 weeks, and I had a fabulous time there. It was unforgettable.
Yeah.
So, I am still playing, and it just and in terms of recording, I'm starting to think about getting another record together. The last one I did was probably 7 or 8 years ago. But it's I really want to have something that represents the best of me. So I just have to figure out what that's going to be.
Fantastic. Well, we'll look forward to that. Happy, thanks so much for your time. It's been a pleasure catching up with you today.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much, John. It's very nice to talk to somebody halfway around the world, and I'm looking forward to someday getting back over there and seeing you guys in person.
Tremendous. Any new Homespun releases we can look forward to?
I was just in the studio yesterday with a wonderful guitarist named Mary Flower, who's done some other. She plays blues guitar beautifully. Al Petaway is coming day after tomorrow, who's also a fingerstyle guitarist. That's one of the best that we've got. And I have there's a bunch of stuff coming out, and then I've got plans to do in the coming year. So there doesn't seem to be any lack of inspiration from that point of view. And I get letters from people all the time. Hey, what about this? What about that? So I have to kind of put that in the hopper and figure out what we can actually get done. But it's been 45 years since we started doing it, so we'll see how much longer we can keep it going.
Fantastic. We'll look forward to all that, and hopefully a new release from yourself not too far down the track. Thanks again, Happy.
Okay, John. Thank you. Good to talk to you.
All the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye.